The latest news out of Miami is that Tropical Storm Don is rapidly losing steam. According to sources, it's because of a meeting Tropical Storm Don's son, Tropical Depression Don Jr., had with a thunderstorm claiming to represent Russian Tropical Storm Vladimir. Trump Report starts now.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Yes, here we are in the Trump Report playing a little game called Dr. Trump. It is the Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt on Twitter, and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. To my left, camera right, for those watching on YouTube, Brook Soliz at Brook Soliz TV. Thank you for coming back and hanging out with us.
Always happy to be here.
Next to Brook, our old pal Drexel Heard at Drexel Heard 2 weeks in a row.
Hello.
No.
Should we go for 3 next week? Well, all right, we'll see what happens.
Calm
Don't
down.
get me too excited. I know. Do not get me excited.
I know I'm excited.
It's like if only Chelsea were here, we'd have everyone. But you know,
crew.
yeah, exactly. But then somebody has to be on the couch, and you know,
that's the couch that's dissent.
I would love to be on the couch.
Well,
It's very comfortable.
There's no one on the couch dissenting right now, so we would have to give it a different name. And on the end, Scott Moore at SMan80, and of course. The show is at Trump Report ABTV. And if you're in YouTube watching this right now, join us in the chat. And Jimbo, if you could show us the chat when you have a moment, that would be fantastic. So the episode is called Dr. Trump because there are actually multiple reasons for that. The first is healthcare. Basically what happened is that the wheels kind of started coming off the GOP Senate healthcare bill late last week. And now we have looked at pretty much a full-blown train derailment, just to overextend the metaphor. Let's go through a little bit of the way this story developed. Yesterday afternoon, at least Pacific time, we heard that neither Mike Lee nor Jerry Moran of Kansas would vote for the Senate health care bill. So, not really surprising. Mike Lee is one of those guys. And Jerry Moran was just like, yeah, me neither. Around 8 o'clock Eastern, though, Mitch McConnell released a statement. Regretfully, it's now apparent that the effort to repeal and immediately replace the failure of Obamacare will not be successful. And we'll kind of pause the proceedings right there. And we'll start with Drexel. When you heard that, were you upset? Were you shocked? Appalled? What was your reaction to that, Drexel? For people who don't know you, they might be surprised to hear how you reacted to this.
I was none of that. I was not shocked at all. I think that when Susan Collins, we left off Susan Collins there. When Susan Collins said no, I feel like Republicans start to take the Marco Rubio stance on things. Like they wait till somebody else does it, and then everybody else starts to join
Right.
in.
It's sort of a little bit later in the proceedings.
Right.
We're going to get Murkowski and Shelley Moore Capito as well. So,
but Murkowski was already kind of there.
Yeah, exactly.
Capito was already there. Dean Heller was already there.
Right.
He just didn't know what to say. He needed a cover, and I feel like they were trying to cover Dean Heller. But you know, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit, but this goes to show that for a long time, as a Democrat, Democrats at least recently have been like, Nancy Pelosi needs to go. Well, at least Nancy Pelosi can keep her people in line.
It's a great point.
And Mitch McConnell has a hard time doing his job. His job is to keep his caucus in line.
And I think the biggest challenge, obviously, that McConnell faces is literally the razor-thin margin that he has to work with. He couldn't lose 2 more, and then once he had it, it was over. If he had a slightly, sturdier base of Republicans, which I'm sure Drexel is not counting on that anytime soon, that would make it a lot easier. But yeah, basically, once 1 or 2 people go, I mean, and here's the thing, that the Democrats are able to be very partisan, especially when it comes to President Obama's signature legislation. I'm sure there are certainly other issues that you might be able to get a couple defectors, but this isn't it.
And if they think that the health care bill was kind of a problem for them, they just released their budget and their tax plan. That's going to be even worse for them. They're not even going to budge on that because you've got people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee and all these other guys who are going to do the exact same thing they're doing now, but on the budget side. So basically, they're not going to be doing anything. And I think there was an article out today that said that this was the most unproductive Congress in 164 years.
I saw that same article.
Right.
By the way, I'm pretty sure every Congress, probably the last 15 years, is actually giving us the stats of we're the least productive. So I think it's a very bipartisan. There's one thing that they do well together: be unproductive.
But if you can be the least productive in your first 6 months, you are doing something.
They're winning.
You're winning. You are
they're
winning for sure. Yeah.
That's a very
They're
good
winning
point.
at losing.
Yeah.
Scott, your thoughts, sort of before we get to the next step in these proceedings, when it was really starting to break that it wasn't going to happen, and McConnell actually said this. What were your thoughts? Was there a modest yippee, or?
There was a modest yippee, but going back to last week, I mentioned that this was not going to pass in its present form. There was no way it's going to pass, and here's the problem with this healthcare bill. It's worse than, instead of fixing the flaws with Obamacare, it's worse. And the thing is, going back to when Obamacare first came out, it was based on a conservative healthcare plan from the Heritage Foundation, from Romney Care in Massachusetts. So it's already a right healthcare bill. So there is no way that anything that they could come up with was going to be any better, that was going to appease everybody in the Republican Party. You can't have it both ways. You can't have great health care for everyone, like Trump claimed, and still be able to cut taxes and Medicaid and everything else that Republicans want to do and that the conservative base wants. You can't have it both ways. So you're going to have a worse plan, and there's no way they're ever, no matter what they try to do, are they ever going to be able to have a better plan than what they had with Obamacare, in the sense of keeping those people on insurance, keeping the Medicaid out there, and still being able to cut taxes and have what the base is going to want, and without losing people off the insurance rolls. It's just not gonna happen.
I think having to appease both moderates and conservatives, whereas Democrats, at least so far, have had a little bit of an easier time with that, obviously.
Right, I mean, it's just never going to happen, and no matter what they do, and that's why they're finding that out. And it's very easy to go through all the time and do the symbolic no votes when Obama was president, knowing that he was going to veto it regardless, then they actually come up with a plan. They've had 7 years. They thought they were going to lose the presidential election in 2016. They never came up with a viable plan, and trying to repeal it and then replace it later is not going to work either, because that's going to put too much uncertainty in the markets. It's never going to happen with that. So they really should just admit defeat and move on, and then eventually be able to come up with a better plan.
Well, I do want to move on to that, but Drexel, you actually wrote something down, so I can tell you.
So it's a very important one, right, Drexel?
They were like, Drexel's taking notes. I just didn't want to forget certain things in my head, like that I just wanted to bring up, because there's a couple of really, like Tom Cotton today in January said, we don't want to vote for something that that doesn't have a replacement behind it. Mm-hmm. Then today he was like, well, the same senators who voted for the same repeal last year can't not vote for this new repeal next week. So that was a little weird that Tom Cotton decided to flip on what he said just a few months ago. And then Donald Trump said that he thought that the House health care bill was mean, yet this new plan that Mitch McConnell is going into is even meaner. And so you're like, 22 million people versus 32 million people. Right. What is more mean, Mr. President? So I'm actually just surprised that Republicans have been boo-hooing about not being able to govern for the last 7 years or whatever. They have this opportunity to do
a tremendous opportunity, by the way.
Huge opportunity to take what Governor Sandoval in Nevada has been doing, which is to take Obamacare and make it into a Republican-esque workable plan for the state of Nevada, which is why he's one of the strongest governors against anything that's coming out. And so I think that the Republicans, for their sake, should learn from what the Republican governors are doing about the Affordable Care Act in their own states. If Republicans believe in states' rights, they need to trust the governors across the country. And the governors across the country are telling them, you cannot vote for this.
And that's like John Kasich in Ohio, and even Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, and you see these governors that are keeping the Medicaid expansions there and how it's working with their state residents there. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think a little cooperation amongst the senators as well, because of course when they decided to vote on the repeal, they had 13 of the guys. They didn't let any of the women, and then these women, Capito, Collins, and Murkowski came back strong and said, "Nope, we're not going to allow this to happen." Which I was very happy and proud to see them standing up for what they believe in and what they know is good for their constituents. Now, if they could learn to get together and all think a little more strategically together, then maybe
they could leverage the fellas. Now, Brooke, I wanted to actually start with you on sort of the next step in the process, which was, well, we can't repeal and replace despite how many times that was offered. So let's just go ahead and repeal and, well, fuck it. We'll just see what happens after that.
Right, and
and of course, you're going to get less support for that than repeal and replace.
Obviously.
Because,
I mean, it was a last-ditch effort.
Yeah.
Great for trying.
It was like a Hail Mary where you actually didn't throw the ball. You just sort of went, and for people listening on iTunes, I just flung nothing. And we're like, oh, hey, that didn't go anywhere.
Right.
I have to admit, I was a little surprised that they were actually even going to go, but that's just how desperate it was.
Right. And then, like I said, once these three ladies said, it's dead in the water for us, and I think it was Senator Robert also, which is the fourth one, who said, no, it's not going to happen. I mean, I could have foresaw that, but...
Right.
I feel like Mitch McConnell just threw his
They
hands
wanted
up
to
in the
go
air.
from something mean to, like you said, even meaner.
Even meaner.
Give a last-ditch effort, and it didn't happen.
Well, let's talk for a minute about what the ramifications would be if somehow, the hypothetical, if they'd been able to be like, oh, yeah, you know what, yeah, fine. We'll just go ahead and we'll repeal it and not worry about replacing it. I mean, obviously, you sort of have problems in the private market. You're trying to halt all of a sudden some Medicaid expansion. And I guess it's an additional 14 million Americans that all of a sudden are like, yeah, nothing for you. So I think that it was, look, they tried to make a plan that people didn't agree on, but this was just like, it really is like you had, less than a minute left on the clock and you're just going to do something. I
hand it to the one guy that's on the bench and just go for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Your mom hasn't seen you play all year.
And that's
Go
Ted
for it.
Cruz, by the way.
Yeah.
If anybody here knows Ted,
Ted Cruz's
the ball.
dad, who helped plot to assassinate Fidel
Right,
Castro,
exactly.
hasn't seen him play all
Right.
season. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I just wasn't surprised that people didn't take it, but I was like, is he really saying that out loud? And go figure, President Trump very upset, but he did agree and said, this is a quote, Republicans should just repeal failing Obamacare now and work on a new health care plan that will start from a clean slate. Now, he could have stopped right there, but he said Dems will join in.
Yeah.
And he's elaborated on
So
that,
confident.
basically.
Yeah,
And they're going to just sort of let it fail. And there are some ways where legitimately they can kind of, it's like a very small leak in the air mattress that is Obamacare. Just a little pinprick where if they just don't enforce things, they don't support it, it can actually basically die the way it's talking about.
But the problem is that Republican governors across the country who, you can't go, the Republican governors who did not have their states buy into the Affordable Care Act, we're already there. You can't make it worse because those Republican governors who have already expanded Medicaid and Medicare in their states, they're already there. So when he says that he's just gonna let it fail, it's at the point where it can't get any worse.
Right.
And he tries to pretend like he's not going to own it. And
I
which I
tweeted
thought
back
was
to
very
that,
funny.
which I said, you own it, and so does the GOP.
So,
every single bit of it. Don't even.
I think I saw that.
But the other side of that is this is where I had my little Twitter war this morning.
Ooh, tell us all
because it was just about like, I was like, how
Who did you get into a Twitter war with?
I
civilians?
You
Drexel's
can follow
always
me.
beefing
You
on
can
Twitter.
follow
No,
me
I'm just
on Twitter at Drexel Heard and find out who I was beefing with this morning. But it was just about like the civics lesson that Donald Trump does not like. That Donald Trump doesn't understand basic civics.
No.
For him to be like, oh well, they only need 8 more senators to pass. You're like, what? That's not how.
That's why I actually wrote him on that too. I said, you need to go back and take a civics
That's
class.
not how it works. and then the person
fun
who
trolling.
I said who came at me was like, well, he's just trying to get a rise out of you. I said, no, you're not trying to get a rise out of me.
No.
I just want my president to understand basic civics.
Right.
And
how things work.
He's in the place where he could learn from a whole bunch of people. They could just give him Civics 101, like a one sheet,
Yep.
like here's what happens, and he should be fine. In big font,
But
big
PowerPoint.
font,
That-
and pictures.
That's just getting him to concede that there are people that know more than he does, which I don't think he believes. So he's like, no, this is what we're going to do. Now, one interesting thing that I heard was John Cornyn said that he says that there's going to be a vote later this week. And he said that earlier today. I don't know if he's still saying that now, but I'm going to just guess no, because part of the thing we left out of all of this was the first real crack was the fact that John McCain wasn't going to be able to vote. And obviously, look, a lot of people, you can say what you want about John McCain, but you obviously want him to be healthy and doing well. And again, whatever you think of his politics, the man is an American hero. He spent 6 years literally in a cage in Vietnam, and he could have been set free after a couple months, but he didn't because he stayed with his men. And whatever he's done since then almost doesn't matter to me. It matters a little bit, but almost doesn't matter.
Right.
No, he's sometimes very rational.
Yeah, and of course they're working under the assumption that he was going to vote for this.
That's
by
what
the
I'm
way.
saying.
Right now, I was just like, that wasn't a slam dunk.
Yeah, when he had amendments to it, and the interesting point they brought up is how much someone would have to pay for his surgery and recuperation if they didn't have insurance coverage, and it was something like $75,000. Who knows
So
exactly
they thought
that's down to the point.
he would actually give his crusty vote? Is that
Right. And that and I said this yesterday, I had a little tweet storm last night too, just about what Democrats can do in this situation and how, I've been super critical about the messaging from the DNC freakers. And this is the time where the DNC could have been running ads in Arizona about healthcare in Arizona, what it would cost, what your senators get versus what you would get, and then run those ads in different places, and then be good, and then craft that message. But they're not doing that.
No, and my one of my Republican friends on Twitter was saying the same thing. Is like, that's why the D's are out of power, because they have had not a very good messaging right now. And I said it's true, although the R's are doing a pretty good job as of late with their messaging, which hasn't been that great. But it is true is that there has not been a cohesive message, and they're not targeting the people that they should be targeting, especially right now with this very important ads. And again, the same thing. Like the senators are going to be exempt from this health care plan conveniently for them. They were going to have their own Cadillac plans, while the rest of the people they were voting on were going to have to, be cut.
So would you say that the Democrats are losing focus because of Russiagate?
No, but I always go back to people and say, go back to 2009 as well and look at where the GOP was, and they were very rudderless in 2009. They were out of power in Washington, and so there is an ebb and flow, and it doesn't mean that the Democrats can't come back. The problem is they're not taking advantage of these really big gaffes right now that the Republicans are basically handing them left and right, and they should be taking advantage of that right now, and they have not been. Whereas the Republicans were sort of out.
I just feel like the leadership is not really there either.
Yeah, they're sort of in a vacuum right now.
It goes right back to the ineffective Congress being a bipartisan issue. Nobody's really getting anything done. Nobody's taking advantage of the opportunities that have been afforded to them. Scott, you're on record as saying, just moments ago, that they're not going to be able to put something together, and they're seeming to concede that. But let me start with Brooke. Do you feel like Republicans would be able to put some kind of, I don't even mean this week like John Cornyn says, do you think it's possible that they can put something together that they can at least get the 4 to 8 more votes they may or may not need?
Oh, Lord. I mean, anything is possible, right? But in reality, no, I actually don't. Because you have a handful that are on such ends of the spectrum. And so I feel like Rand Paul's not going to be... I don't know if they can really meet in the middle.
When you have like Rand Paul and some of the other senators we mentioned, it's very difficult. If Rand Paul was one of 12, it probably wouldn't be a big deal, but it's really just a couple of people, and then
there would have to be some major concessions made on both sides.
And I would say two things. Like, the reason why the House passed it is because they knew they were going to give the dirty work to the Senate, so that's why they could easily just kind of
like, hey, we did our job.
They did it, and now now they have to do the dirty work. But also say the clock is ticking, because the longer they take to come up with a viable plan, now they're getting too close to the 18 midterms, and people are up for re-election, and they're not going to want to put anything out there that's going to be toxic, that's going to affect them. So they actually have a pretty limited clock to be able to do something before they were out until after the midterms.
And in order to do concessions that you feel like Rand Paul's going to agree, I always feel like every time he's like, no more drone strikes, no more NSA. Like, he always has like 5 things. He's like, you got to take care of all that, and then I'll vote for anything you want to. And it's always his big ticket items, the things that no one's going to budge on. So I kind of have to agree that I don't see like we're going to get much movement in there. And we have Lady Goth in the chat. She said they should be shouting out the bullshit the Republicans have been passing at how it damages the common person. Russia is an idea, make it personal for them. And that's something I've said many times on the show. And Chelsea will sometimes get upset. It's easy to talk about because she's not here. Where I'm just like,
I'll take up for you, Chelsea.
Don't worry so much about Russia. And whenever I say that, I don't mean give up, but it's like, it's all you hear about.
But I also don't think that it's not necessarily the Democrats. Like, they get asked these questions and they just kind of answer them, and the message has, like, right now, from what I understand, the party is trying to figure out the message. So that's why I don't think you hear as much messaging conversations right now. But I think that the person, I can't remember what his name is, but he's running against Paul Ryan in Wisconsin first.
Oh, yeah.
And to Lady Goth's point, he put out his first ad was super personal because he has like his mom.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
The blue collar worker.
I can't remember what his name is. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the chat room. But it was a super personal ad, and I think that those are the types of ads that the Democrats have to, especially in the flyover states. Those are the types of ads that are actually going to make the most impact. But on in the New York and then in the LA and all of in our areas, I mean, if you go on Facebook, all the people are talking about is kind of Russia, because that's what's in the news right now. It's not even like Democrats, it's like the news is talking about Russia, because every day
it's hard not to.
It's like when we talked about Hillary Clinton and her emails, and it was like a slow drip of emails. This is a slow drip of Russia like every day. So at this point, Republicans are getting a taste of what we had to kind of listen to for 6 months of emails coming out, and you're like, you think that the emails that didn't have anything going on in them are bad, and now you've got a lot of this other Russia stuff that's coming out every day.
And it's not going away either.
And it's not going away.
As much as they wish it would.
And it shouldn't.
I'm glad you mentioned Hillary Clinton, because I wanted to move on to some recent polling that I feel will get an interesting reaction from the other end of the table. According to a Bloomberg poll released earlier today, President Trump is more favorable than Hillary Clinton by 2 percentage points, 41% to 39%. Of course, the inverse of that is 58% unpopular to 55% unpopular. Now, you can dispute the numbers and say, of course, they're within the margin of error, but the point is, wow, those numbers are really close for a guy that Democrats say, look at the awful job that he's doing. And I think that the idea of this guy's so terrible, he would do such a bad job, there's no way he could get reelected, is kind of how he got elected in the first place. So, to the point of what we were talking about, it's important to understand what happened in the first place, because you don't need to convince Drexel, Scott, Chelsea, and I'll speak for Brooke, and you don't need to convince any of you guys and ladies to not vote for Donald Trump in 2020. What you need to do is convince Storage Yard resident Stephen Helmkamp, just a shout out because I like to mention him every week. One day he'll be back on.
I don't know if he actually voted for him, though.
I don't know if he did. I think he voted for no one. Yeah.
Is Shareable Texas a Republican?
I don't think Shareable Texas is.
I like him a lot, by the way. I really like that comment you made earlier. Shareable Texas. I'm from Texas.
What about the white spot on my eyebrow? Yeah, I saw that. I hit my head like 4 years ago. But anyway, but that's kind of the point. It's like, so the actual poll isn't even really that important. It's just part of the conversation where people are still talking about how much they don't like her.
But I also think that from that poll, I mean, I didn't look like at the trickle down, like who they were talking to, whatever. But I also think that you're coming off of a primary where there are a lot of, right now there's still a lot of us versus them, a lot of Hillary versus Bernie. So if you're talking to a wing of the party and you're polling them and they're part of that question and answer, where in a normal year Democrats would be like, well, yeah, Hillary Clinton's super popular.
Right.
Well, yeah, and I would say to that end too, because we just came off a very contested election, and we all know she had a lot of baggage, which is why she didn't win. Because if she didn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Those Midwestern states wouldn't have flipped. Florida, North Carolina, all the states that flipped, if the fact was she didn't have baggage. But also the point is she's not running. And if you also look, if we're talking about polls, and we look at all the generic Democrats and all the matchups with other Democrats right now against him, it's more than 10 points, except for, I think, Kamala Harris.
Right.
It was like a 1-point margin of error. So it doesn't, polls, especially at this point, don't really mean anything until you're actually running. And also, I have to say, I don't even know if he's going to be up for re-election in 2020, depending what happens with Russia, or if he gets primaried, and he's very
that's
unpopular.
Sort of like how every week I mention Stephen. Every week you say that you don't think he'll be on the ballot in 2020.
I don't actually, and I think I also
either.
think that if he continues to tank, if he even as we've always talked about every week, if he doesn't have think he's going to win,
if he
he's not going
thinks
to
he
run.
won't win, he won't run.
He will not run.
If he's sure he won't win.
If there's enough Republicans that are now against him, and he's still, not has been cleared about the Russian queer or whatever, he could very easily have a rival in the primaries in 2020, much like Reagan rivaled Ford in '76 and really damaged him when he was running in the general against Carter. But it could very easily happen. So it doesn't really mean much.
And I think that you're still going to see, like we talked about Governor Sandoval earlier. If Governor Sandoval runs, he will win the Republican nomination. Like at this point, if the elections were held,
do you think if he ran against a Trump who was running for re-election, you think in the primaries he would win?
I think so. I think that if you had that message of, listen, the Democrats are terrible, and we don't want them to win, but here's what I did in my state: I expanded Medicaid while cutting this, and this. I protected the state of Nevada from an immigration standpoint.
In a growing blue state.
In a blue state.
If he's rational.
Federal
If he's
level.
rational.
Yeah.
Which is what Trump is not.
And he might be a little bit different than, say, a John Kasich who is running in a field of a really crowded field. John Kasich, like, if you look at the numbers, John Kasich couldn't pull. Nobody could pull the numbers they needed. If Donald Trump wasn't in, like if there weren't that many people, John Kasich probably would have been the Republican nominee. If the Republicans are smart, they won't have 13 people running. They'll have
they wouldn't anyways during an
four or five
year.
people running.
Right.
Democrats will be smart to do the same thing,
Right.
to not have 13 people running, but to probably find your core, get everybody together, be like,
it
listen.
wouldn't be hard to
Could you start
imagine
diluting?
13 Democrats that could do the adequate amount of fundraising.
We have to find 13 Democrats at this point because we're
Speaking
at
of-
That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah.
I just read a story that I guess Soros had a little meeting and they were kind of conspiring to put Kamala at the helm as the potential future candidate. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I wanted to go back to the GOP polling, or the polling, really quickly. As an independent, I know you guys don't know that. That's what I am.
I just assumed.
As a registered voter.
She says in her bright blue shirt that she's wearing for those
As a
listening on iTunes.
registered voter.
No,
I
nothing
do
subtle
have to
there.
say regarding Clinton, I mean, I'm not surprised that she's polling at that level because, and I don't want to hurt any feelings here, I mean, she did have a lot of baggage. I think she needs to just stay where she is and be done with it.
Yeah.
And I think that now that we have President Trump, I just hate saying that, but now that we
Drexel
have
actually doesn't say
I don't say it either.
don't?
Actually,
I very
now that
rarely
we
say
have
it.
Trump as
I don't
president, they continue to bash her, and then we continue to see these things like the Loretta Lynch finding when Comey was on stand, and so it's like she is the punching bag, and she will remain. And I just think that she's probably just done and better that way.
It's interesting that Republicans would continue to go after Hillary Clinton when they should be setting their sights on Democrats across the country.
Yeah, you would
so you would think that from a tactic perspective,
Right, 'cause
like don't make Hillary Clinton the boogeyman. Like she's not doing.
But no one's
Here's the
comparable
thing.
to her baggage.
Here's the thing.
Right.
If
Here's the
they're
thing.
doing something wrong, who can they find that's doing something as wrong? Only Hillary Clinton is the person that they can compare.
If anything that this conversation will do on September 12th, when Hillary Clinton's memoir
I know,
drops,
right?
it will make
I pre-ordered.
which I pre-ordered.
I thought September 12th was when political culture was coming back.
That's September 5th.
So you'll have to
having
have
Hillary
It's
Clinton on
coming
that
back.
day.
Hillary Clinton's- Could you imagine?
They're going to do
I
their
would
predictions,
pass out.
like on many AfterBuzz shows, predictions for what'll be in the memoir.
Right. But like, it would only make that memoir stronger. And, I said the other day, I really hope that it's a really good burn book.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Like, that's all I want from Hillary Clinton. I
pretty
want
sure-
the Hillary Clinton that
yeah.
we've seen
Yes.
over the past few months in a book.
Let's put it this way. It's a much better book than if she had been elected president because, well, first of all, it wouldn't have come out now.
Right.
But second of all, it's you get to say a lot more things when you're...
And if people think that she is not going to try to set the tone for 2020 by calling some people out in her book, Like, I would be like, let me tell you about Bernie Sanders. Let me tell you what it was really like. Let me tell you what it was like about this person, this person. That's what I would do if I was Hillary Clinton and I was just on the sideline.
I think somehow I just heard Chelsea yelling in Washington, D.C. when you mentioned Bernie.
You can hear her still from here.
Sort of tying a couple things together, we're talking about some polling, we're talking about governors. I read a really interesting article today that it was called 71, 68, 62, and I'll explain what those numbers are. Those are the approval ratings of Republican governors: Charlie Barker in Massachusetts, Larry Hogan in Maryland, Phil Scott in Vermont. And I find those to be very interesting approval ratings because they're, especially the 71, 62, 68, those are all impressive approval ratings for 3 of the bluest states in the whole country. And I kind of wanted to get the thoughts from the panel, and I'll start with Scott. Why do you think Republican governors are so popular, including in Democrats' own backyard?
Because I think it kind of goes back to, in general, when we talk about personalities, and even at the state level, when it comes to governors, you end up having a lot of people end up winning because of their personality that you wouldn't think. Because right now there's Jim Justice, the Democrat in West Virginia, which Trump carried by 63 points. So you do get these kind of flips that do happen. I mean, Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, obviously very blue state, about 12 years ago. But Charlie Baker, to be a Republican governor in a very blue state, you have to obviously be very moderate. Like, Charlie Baker never supported Trump. It does not, stand up for anything that Trump stands for, and you can't do that. The other interesting thing about Vermont, though, is they do their governor elections every 2 years. So they have a lot more variability. The population's very small. It doesn't take a lot to be able to flip from one, party to the other because it's very small. But that's generally how it works in a lot of these liberal blue states. For electing, you have to be moderate. Larry Hogan's an outlier, actually.
To Vermont for a second, though. Plus, in Vermont, there aren't as many Democrats in the state of Vermont as people might think. Like Bernie Sanders, they're independents.
There are a lot of independents, exactly. So
but in Vermont, you also don't run in a party. I don't.
Municipal, not municipal, but statewide you still do. But the fact is every 2 years, like New Hampshire, so you can switch a lot easier, and there's not so much. And again, you cannot be a conservative. You can't be the same type of Republican that you'd be in Alabama, let's say, that you're going to be in Massachusetts and in Vermont. So those states, and they do tend to, what they call the Rockefeller Republicans. Those are those northeastern Republicans, and it's like the Susan Collins of Maine and the Olympia Snow of Maine when she was there. It's the more moderate, the ones that are going to appeal with more of the conservative fiscal responsibility, but be more liberal socially. And that's how they end up winning. I'm surprised that Larry Hogan actually has such high approval ratings, considering Maryland is like the bluest state in the entire country, and Larry Hogan actually isn't so moderate in a lot of things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
It's a bluer state than Oregon, because to me that's.
No, Oregon's actually not that blue, believe it or not.
Interesting. Well, there are a lot of woods, so you have a lot of people in cabins where they're off the grid and stuff.
Yeah,
like
Maryland
that.
had one of the highest for Hillary in 2016. Out of all the
Drexel.
I think there's I'm going to go a different route and talk about where Democrats stand on issues. I think that there are a lot more Democrats generally, at least in my conversations with Democrats. Democrats generally are obviously socially liberal and will stay on that spectrum forever. But when you talk about economic things, if I'm looking at my paycheck or my friends looking at their paycheck, they're like, man, why do I have to pay so many taxes on things? And it's a very conflicted thing in their head. It's, why do I have to pay so much taxes? But why can't I have single-payer universal health care? And so I think that that they're looking at their paycheck first with their right brain, and then they're looking at how can I help people with their left brain. But at the end of the day, in private, they are looking at their right brain, being like, this is where I want my. At the end of the day, it's my paycheck.
Right.
And so
I want people to be helped, but I don't want to pay for it.
I don't personally want to pay for it.
And that is always going to be the hardest sell. Like, we can talk about, here in California, we're obviously having a big debate on single payer health care and bringing that forward. And obviously it's universally across Democrats across California. Everybody's, yes, how can we need single payer health care in California. But then it's like, well, then how do you pay for it? How do you tell the people of California that you're going to take another $4 billion in taxes away from them, and then explain that to Democrats across the country? And again, that's going to be a situation where Democrats are going to have to decide, do you help people, which is what fundamentally it is, or does my paycheck matter? And I think that when you get these Republican governors in these blue states, they're saying, I'm going to help you. However, I'm also not going to raise taxes.
Exactly.
And it's not going to help you as much as you think it's going to help you, but I'm going to keep some money in your pocket. So then on the right brain, they're like, I like that too.
Yeah. But I would say, just bottom line, it does come down, especially for states, it comes to personality too. Because you've got like Steve Bullock, Democrat, governor of Montana. A lot of it does come down to personality and who was running against them in the campaign. And so it's more than people now, although we are becoming more of a strict party line vote, especially in federal elections. In state elections, you still do see the cult of personality win out when it comes to a lot of these elections, and they can tend to be quirkier, like the Jim Justice of West Virginia, when a billionaire Democrat wins. You know, he owns the Greenbrier Resort out there in West Virginia, but he wins as a Democrat versus a Republican. So it gets a little quirkier when you come to.
And I just want to say this last point, because I think that one of the things that I see often too, and I know it's happening in the chat room right now about Kamala Harris, is that there's never going to be a Democrat. There's never going to be a Republican. There's never going to be a politician that's going to be squeaky clean on where the money comes from.
Of course.
So you can just get
Right.
that.
You can't-
Just get that out of your brains right now.
Yeah.
You just can't get elected like that. So
Unfortunately.
I could look at, we could have this conversation about Bernie Sanders, and I could tell you how much money the defense industry pumped into Bernie Sanders because of all those planes that he got for Vermont. So yeah, there's a lot going on in Vermont. So you're just never going to have that politician that is
Someone
going to
will,
be
always be able to make a connection too between the money and then say, he or she is being influenced because I mean, you have to raise money, you have to campaign and get money,
and if Democrats, if far left Democrats or certain Democrats are going to take that position, then Democrats will always lose, and you will always have somebody who's far worse on the issues that you care about in the office, because you're too selfish to realize what actually matters in the grand scheme of things.
Right, and that's what's going to happen with campaign finance reform. You're always going to have to raise money, and it's going to have to come from somewhere. And it's unfortunate, but it happens.
Because let me tell you, your $27 is not going to happen every month because you're too busy worried about the right brain because you can't pay because you want to pay for it. Just can't happen like that.
You can't have both ways.
Speaking about these Republican governors, though, having such great polling numbers, I also think, and this might be a very broad statement, and this might simplify it a little bit, but I think that when they compare these Republican leaders to their ultimate Republican leader, it's all relative, honey, right? It's like you have this irrational, unprofessional, extreme president, and then you have your governor who's Republican and is doing so much of a better job, because anyone's going to be more rational and more professional and offer better options. So then
it's an interesting point. It's almost like it helps some of the down ticket Republicans to have him up at the top. And like, we're not like that. We're the kind of Republicans
he has lowered the standards, not just for Republican leaders, but for
the presidency.
But for the presidency, even for society. I'm sorry to say, if a child, my daughter does something wrong, she can say, well, look at Trump, he lies. She's 6. Actually, she says it all the time. She's like, blame it on Trump, because it's our funny thing.
Does she tweet about it at 3 in.the.morning to sort of explain?
She does have a Snapchat, and she does, eventually.
I do want to. One quick question for Brooke, and we'll get to that. As our independent and as a Texan, realistically, how close do you think we are to there being a Democratic Democratic governor for the state of Texas?
Yeah, exactly.
There's not enough people.
Have you seen our past governors?
I was going to say, there's not enough people that can live in Austin.
We elected Rick Perry, okay, in the past.
Greg Abbott right now, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I mean...
and that's kind of the reason I mentioned it, because I remember rumblings that, could Texas be in play? And no, Texas is never in play.
I wish we have the Castro brothers in Texas.
Sure, that's true.
Not the Fidel and Raul Castro.
Well,
Fidel and Raul.
Not those Castro brothers.
I'm pretty sure you're mistaken. It's Fidel and Raul. No, yes.
Not those Castros. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about. And one could only hope and wish, because they're both very capable, of course. But I just don't foresee it for quite some time.
Yeah, but
especially
next decade for sure. It's definitely going to be playing.
And I wasn't even saying win, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying
it will be.
Close
I'm also somewhat removed. Yes, born and raised in Texas, lived there for 18 years. Now I'm in California.
No, it will be by
but
next
Ted
decade.
Cruz has a a challenger who seems to be pretty popular, who's not a Castro brother, which when Julian Castro said he wasn't running, I think we all were like, oh.
Yeah.
But I think that he has a pretty good challenger. And I think if a Senate seat flips, that will make way for a Democratic governor. I think that it has to start in this with the Senate seat.
Like everything else, the pendulum's going to swing. Up until the 90s, they regularly had Democratic governors in Texas, and up until the early 2000s, Democratic governors all over the South, and it slowly flipped over.
There was hope back then. And Richards.
And like Ann Richards, exactly.
I know, I loved her.
But it's eventually going to shift back the other direction. Right now, the Republicans are at peak power right now, and they keep talking about, we're just going to keep gaining more states. Well, they're really at their peak now when it comes to governorships and other things, and that's the tide's going to start turning in 18. As we got 39 states up for governorships, we've got a lot of senators, a lot of senators, a lot of local, starting from the ground up in the state houses across the country, and it's definitely, it's going to be changing.
I wanted to point out this one polling piece. One of the things that came out in that PPP polling that came out today that said Mike Pence was less popular than Donald Trump as a Republican. And I'm like, what are these Republicans smoking on? Mike Pence is holding fire truck doors for Donald Trump, and he still can't be more popular. He's not even doing anything.
That ties back to something that Scott said earlier, is that Republicans can't have it both ways. And if there's somebody who doesn't believe in people having it both ways, it's Mike Pence. He preys on it every night. Look, there are so many more pressing stories we could delve into during our waning moments here, but instead, believe it or not, we have a valid reason to talk about something I never would have expected to talk about on the Trump Report, and Drexel knows what this is because we were talking about it on Facebook. Doctor Who. Now, Sunday, the BBC announced that the next lead actor on the show, which has been on for 54 years, will be Jodie Whittaker, a woman. People were immediately outraged that this would forever ruin the legacy of a show that has rubber-faced monsters, cardboard sets, and special effects that make Lost in Space look like Avatar. Now, I've had a lot of people say they can't imagine how anyone would be upset. And I would say those are people who, one, don't understand Twitter, two, don't understand nerds, of which I am very proud to say I am one. You need to understand this is a segment of the population who was outraged that a male character was cast as a woman in a reboot of Battlestar Galactica, which was a garbage late 70s sci-fi cowboy show ripoff of Star Wars, which I loved and have seen every episode of. But people get so upset any kind of change, but especially when the change is a girl. What? They're going to ruin anything.
Goodness. And
I'll, of course, point out that Doctor Who was created by a woman. Her name was Sydney Newman. And their director was a gay Indian man. So it was a strangely progressive show. Ms. Newman said that they should cast a woman back in 1986. So the reason why I mention this is because part of this conversation, and I saw Drexel get wrapped up into this, and that's why I was like, let's talk about this on the show. It included the notion that it was done for PC reasons. Now, I do think that there was increasing pressure. And let me explain. This isn't something that I would have a problem with, is casting, not even a huge problem, but I would have trouble wrapping my head around casting a woman to play James Bond. Because that should be, how about Jane Bond or something different. This is an alien who every few seasons, when you don't want to go through contract negotiations, regenerates and looks like a totally different person. So it's like, it stood to reason for a couple decades. They're like, well, why can't it ever be a woman? And they were like, yeah, it's probably about time. And I think I'm much more cynical. I don't think it was done for PC reasons. I think it was done for money. I think the bottom line is, look, we have all these nerd guys who watch, and we have some girls. Let's get a lot more. And I think that's the reason why anything like this ever happens. But Drexel, you posted about this because you were like, I don't even understand all this. But then you got caught up into the...
I did. It was like a world... It was like a world
nerd story. Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness.
I've never seen Doctor Who.
Okay,
it's not...
So I have no idea what's going on.
It's not for most people.
I don't even watch the show.
Yeah, that's the best part of this.
Excuse me, I just posted because I was so confused by the sexism that I was reading on Twitter.
Oh, because people were so mad about it.
Because people were so mad.
And I was like making Jesus a woman.
Right, and I was like, I don't even know what is happening right now. And I had a conversation, I'm wrapping it up in two things, because I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about Gamergate.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And we were talking, and just things that female gamers have to go through, and like why they don't speak out, and everything that comes with that. And then I'm reading these comments about Doctor Who, and I'm like, these are the same people. And I was just, as you were giving us the lowdown on all that, I said, I wonder what would have happened if BBC was like, Doctor Who's going to be a kid. Doctor Who's going to be like a Doogie Howser. Like a young boy, young, super young doctor, and that's what he formed into.
I'll tell you, what I expected was that Doctor Who would be black before he's a woman, and mostly because I just think
it Idris Elba.
Exactly. And Idris Elba should be, he should also be James Bond, by the way.
He should just be everything.
He should be Captain America, he should be everybody. I'm fine with it.
Is his gender so important to him? Because I've never seen the show, so that's why I'm wondering, like,
it's important to people.
What does he do? Is he a super? He's not a superhero.
Just think of him like a magic superhero sort of sci-fi guy. It's the best way to summarize it in limited time.
Right.
Think of him like a superhero who can kind of fix anything.
But the whole thing was just so confusing to me because, like, I was listening to some people say it was too PC, and I was like, how can you be too PC? I always find that when people say that things are too PC, that just means that they're terrible people. If you're saying that, something's too PC, that just means that you can't say what you actually want to say about something.
When we make Santa black.
Right.
Yeah. Or that it's done for that sole purpose.
Because as soon as, if Doctor Who had been black, people would have had the same reaction.
Oh, yeah.
When James Bond turns black, people are going to have the same reaction.
I think Idris is getting too old, so.
But I mean, like, it could be anybody.
I mean,
if you saw, I just had I had a conversation about Doctor Who, and then the day before, I had a conversation about Will Smith as the genie, and I'm like, the same amount of vitriol that was coming about.
That has nothing to do with.
It has nothing to do, but it's that conversation where you're like, there's a lot of people who just, if you're a minority, the chances of the hate coming at you, if you're a minority celebrity, the chance of the hate coming at you is going to be 10 times worse than it would be if it was
I mean, I could understand putting a Caucasian into a character that's supposed to maybe be ethnic, like having Ryan Gosling playing Aladdin.
I mean, I couldn't see that.
No, I'm saying I can understand the hate, the backlash. I can understand them getting mad.
I couldn't see Ryan Gosling playing Aladdin.
I could see the backlash, but I don't understand
that the woman who's playing Jasmine is Egyptian. I read that in an article.
I did see that.
Yeah, I'm more upset that it's Will Smith because I'm like, oh, wasn't that?
Wait, it's going to be Will Smith?
Is the genie? Yeah. The genie was Robin Williams. Let's get a comedian. Let's get somebody who's funny.
But they think Will Smith is funny.
Will Smith is a comedian, kind of.
Well, I was definitely against Will Smith playing genie, but whatever.
I was too, but that's for different. Yeah, I was.
But anyway, and we only have a couple minutes here, and the reason why I wanted to kind of open this. Well, we're talking about this because of the fact that
Hillary Clinton
you
get
just
elected?
Well, it does tie into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What it ultimately comes down to is, I see this thing, and I'm going to say that for a lot of people who are like, I don't like Trump, but the other choice is woman. And
I see what you're
can obviously there's so many reasons to have not wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton.
You're saying sexism is alive and well.
I think that no matter where you look,
absolutely.
But the reason why we're having the conversation is that, and also because there were a lot of people that were like, oh, that couldn't possibly be an issue. But as Drexel saw, people get so upset, and this is a fictional character on a British TV show. This isn't even one of our shows.
Right.
We're getting upset that something's happening in England.
And I know I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this from my far left wing of my fans, which I don't have.
The people are so excited in the chat that you're here. You definitely have fans.
That the same conversations that I was seeing about the Doctor Who character reminded me a lot of the same conversations that I was seeing from the Bernie Bro wing of the primary.
Yeah,
and I'm like, you people are the same. Yeah. And it's the same people watching this and saying this that are voting like this. And if somebody comes to me and says that sexism is not alive and well on the far left, they are smoking something.
Well, and that goes back to what we were kind of saying before about how the extreme left and the extreme right sort of cross over because they have a lot of similarities.
They are birds of a feather.
Those extreme sides, and you're absolutely right when it comes to that. But I will say with Christian, as I do believe it was more not so much cynical, but it wasn't done as a PC, but as a way to get attention and be like, bring in more fans,
change it up a bit,
right? And like, oh, now people are talking about it like we are, and now we'll get more fans to watch it because it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and look,
and it's the 13th Doctor Who. So
and here's the thing: there've been a lot of female characters on the show, but now the main character is a female, and that's something that can be looked up to by not saying that your daughter Isabel is going to be watching it, but they're at least
now she is.
No, she might be more interested. Because
Right.
that's a girl. That's
it
interesting.
represents me. And
And in the final point before we wrap up, I also can see the sort of, it's an exciting thing that there'd be a strong female role model, because my wife is expecting our second child, a little girl, December 19th. So we've already decided her name will be Doctor. No, that's actually not true. So this story is sort of coming the same week where I'm finally be able to start telling people, and I'm like, well, I guess the Spice Girls had it right. # girl power. Anyway, we are out of time now for the Trump Report. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. Scott Moore at SMan80, Drexel Heard at Drexel Heard, Brook Soliz at Brook Soliz TV. I'm Christian Bladt at Christian DMZ. Don't forget the show at Trump Report ABTV. Join us next week. Drexel might be here. Brooke might be here. Scott and I will be here. We know Chelsea will be here. Let's try and squeeze 5 in the Anyway, thanks everybody who joined us in the chat. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz
See you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.